Hello everyone, I'm Zoe from Zoe K Portraits. Today I decided to do a short walkthrough tutorial video on my most recent drawing, this cat drawing. I'm going to show you some time-lapse and some real-time videos that I recorded while I was drawing, and explain a bit about my drawing process and about the decisions I make as I draw. Hope you like it! So the first thing I like to do in animal drawings like this one is analyze the fur in the reference photo. I identify each little part of fur where, for example, where the fur is lighter or darker or changes in texture. Then, one by one, I draw every little clump of fur, and then I usually blend it all together with a blending stump. Here, I noticed that above the cat's eye, she has some long hair-like, eyebrow-like fur strands that are quite light in color. So what I'm doing is I'm sort of creating a frame around where that fur is. I'm drawing all the darker bits around it. I'm using quite short strokes because in general all of the fur on her head is quite short. And I'm just doing the best I can to imitate that. Here I'm adding some tiny little, very precise fur strokes at the end of this clump. Now I'm adding much darker strokes in this sort of eyeliner-like shape that she has coming out from the side of her eye. Just making sure that it all looks even and that the fur all flows in the same direction, which is, in this case, to our right. So I'm starting from the bottom of the clump and then going up and to our right. Here I'm starting to draw another little clump above the eyeliner-like clump of fur that I was drawing earlier. This one has a few highlights that I'm leaving space for. Here I'm using some faster, more brush-like strokes to sort of transition into the area of fur above her eye. Here I'm just finishing off this clump, adding tiny little strokes at the edges. I've also sped up the video a little bit. Before it was all in real time. Now I'm adding longer, more brush-like strokes again to transition more easily and smoothly into the bit of fur above her eye. Unfortunately, I made the fur a little bit too dark here. I'm gonna have to go over that later and see if I can fix it. Here I'm just adding more tiny little details, really minuscule strokes of fur, and I've sped up the video again. It's now double the speed. Okay, now I'm going in to do the eyebrow. I'm using a very light graphite pencil and drawing in big, long strokes that go mostly to the right and up. Just filling up all that white space there and also going out a bit into the fur I already drew. Okay, now I'm going to try and lighten up the fur around the eyebrow because I made it a bit too dark, as I mentioned previously. So I've got my stick eraser, whose tip I have cut with a craft knife to give it a sort of edge, and I'm using it to sort of add in some white hairs from the eyebrow that overlap the dark hairs that I put in earlier. Since I have the stick eraser, I'm also taking the opportunity to add highlights and more white hairs all around the face a little bit. If you have a white colored pencil or a white charcoal pencil, you can do this that I'm doing with the stick eraser with that. I myself actually have two white charcoal pencils, but I prefer to use the stick eraser for the purpose of highlights because I find that the charcoal pencils are a bit tinted. I'd rather have pure white than have slightly blue white or slightly yellow white. Here I'm starting on this clump with quite long fur. You can't see it in this video, but I'm holding the pencil quite far from the tip because that gives me control over the pencil and the ability to do long strokes without pressing the pencil down too hard. I'm being really delicate with my strokes here, and I'm making sure to follow the direction of the fur again. That's super important. Here I'm going in on the ear again with my graphite pencil this time instead of my stick eraser. I'm drawing some long light strokes that are basically meant to show that there isn't just a block of white fur there, it's sort of feathered on top of the ear, which itself is darker. I'm also making the inside of the ear a little bit darker in general to match the reference photo. Here I'm going in with a darker graphite pencil to do just that. Again, holding the pencil quite far away from the tip, using more the side of the pencil tip rather than the very tip itself. For the edge of the ear here, I need more precision, so I'm holding the pencil closer to the tip and using the tip itself rather than the side. Here I'm just adding some more strokes to just darken the general shade of the fur, and I'm always making sure to draw in the direction of the fur, otherwise it would not turn out how it looks in the reference photo. Here I'm just going in with the darker graphite pencil to add darker fur strokes where I see that they're necessary. This cat's fur is very colorful. She has multiple shades of brown, white, gray, and red in her coat, and so I need to be careful to reflect all of those different color changes. So by now I've started to go down to the cheek. I've blocked out some new fur areas. And again, I'm following the direction of the fur, which is kind of going outward to the right and then down a bit. Now I'm working on this tiny little patch of fur just under the eye. It curves into the gradient patch of fur that I was showing earlier. I'm using extremely tiny strokes to do this one. Now connecting it back into the rest of the fur. I'm being very careful here because I don't want to cover the highlight that is underneath her eye. I'm trying to avoid that little white space there. After I finish going over this edge here and sort of making the transition as smooth as possible, I'm going to go back to the rest of the cheek and start continuing to block in more clumps. What I like to do is I block in the most obvious bits of fur that I can see, so either going around very bright highlights or doing very dark patches. And then I like to go in and fill the rest in after. Now I've just about finished blocking in the most obvious dark and light clumps of fur, so I'm going in and filling the spaces around them. Here I've noticed that the fur isn't monochrome, there's dark strokes and light strokes of fur, so I'm drawing dark strokes and leaving out space for the lighter strokes, instead of adding them with a stick eraser, for example. By observing my reference photo carefully, I've noticed that on the left of this clump, the fur is mostly just one color, just gray, while on the right side of the clump, there are darker and lighter strokes mingled together, as I was showing earlier. So I have to make the transition from the monochrome gray to the multicolored fur smoothly. I'm working on both different sides, and I'm slowly, stroke by stroke, trying to bring both sides together in a smooth way. So in the previous time lapse, I darkened the bit of fur I was showing earlier, and I also started filling in the fur to the right of the eye. Now I'm going in with my stick eraser again to add more highlights. Again, I was careful to sharpen it with my craft knife before using it. Now, before we wrap up today's video, I'd like to show one technique that I use, especially when drawing extremely short fur. Besides adding extremely short strokes, I stipple the fur, basically adding dots instead of actual strokes. This reflects how short the fur is and gives a nice variation in texture. Thanks for watching my realistic cat drawing tutorial. For more content on realistic portraiture, please subscribe to my channel. Also, leave a comment down below telling me what sort of content you'd like to see me do next. If you're interested in commissioning a drawing from me, you can contact me via email, Instagram, or Facebook through the links in my channel description. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!